Soren had begun his work on the alfalfa field at dawn, tending to the crops as the early light crept over the horizon. The field was quiet, and no one had crossed his path since he started. He had worked without interruption, but as the morning unfolded, an unexpected discovery was about to change everything. It was unusual to see a wolf this close to the fields, but what Soren saw next was even more extraordinary: a baby nestled beside the animal. The realization hit him hard. Someone must have left the baby there, likely before sunrise. Soren could hardly believe it, but as he considered the cool morning air, he understood that the wolf had likely saved the baby by sharing its body heat. The scene was surreal, and as Soren watched the wolf protectively hover over the infant, a thought struck him. Had the wolf mistaken the baby for one of her own? Soren knew little about wolves beyond their reputation as predators, but this wolf's behavior was gentle, almost maternal. Still, he knew the child needed human care, and he immediately thought of someone who could help. He fumbled with his phone and sent a message to the one person he trusted in an emergency: Dr. Ileana Lewis, a young and vibrant physician who had recently moved to the area. It hadn't been long since Soren had met Dr. Lewis, and he still remembered their first encounter vividly. He had gone for his annual checkup with Dr. Baker, his usual physician, but Dr. Baker was on leave, and Ileana had taken his place. Soren, who was used to the old-fashioned ways of the town's longtime doctor, was caught off guard by Dr. Lewis' youthful energy and modern approach. Her nut-brown hair and lively eyes had left an impression on him that day, one he hadn't been able to shake since. Ileana wasn't what Soren had expected in a doctor. She rode a motorcycle, something that seemed reckless to him given her profession. And she had an impressive knowledge of football that rivaled even his own. Every time he saw her after that first appointment, he found himself both nervous and intrigued, especially when he learned more about her adventurous side. But today wasn't the time to think about that. A baby's life was at stake, and he knew she would come. Soren glanced back at the wolf, who was still watching over the baby with a low growl in her throat. He didn't have any weapons with him, only his pitchfork, which would be useless in this situation. He didn't want to harm the wolf, not after it had shown such unexpected kindness to the child, but he needed to find a way to approach the baby without provoking the animal. He had a sudden, somewhat crazy idea. People always said that wolves and dogs were closely related, didn't they? Maybe, just maybe, he could talk to the wolf as if she were a dog. He crouched slightly and called out softly, "Hey, nice girl. You're a good wolf, aren't you?" The wolf, however, was not impressed by his attempts at doggy speak. She crouched lower, muscles tensing as if preparing to pounce. Soren quickly realized he needed a different approach. Then he remembered the sandwich he had packed for lunch. He cautiously made his way back to the tractor, keeping the wolf in his line of sight. He opened his lunchbox and tore the sandwich in half, hoping the scent of beef would catch the wolf's attention. "Here you go, girl. Fresh sandwich," he said, tossing a piece of it a few feet away from the baby. The wolf's growl softened as she sniffed the air, clearly tempted by the food. She hesitated, torn between her protective instincts and the lure of the sandwich. Soren seized the moment and tossed the other half of the sandwich farther away, closer to the edge of the field. The wolf finally made her decision, stalking toward the food while glancing back at the baby, uncertain about leaving the infant in Soren's care. Soren acted quickly. In one swift motion, he scooped up the baby, cradling the small boy in his arms. The child let out a loud wail, startled by the sudden movement, but Soren held him close, murmuring soothing words. To his relief, the wolf seemed to accept that the baby was now in good hands. She gave a final low growl, then turned her attention fully to the sandwich. Just as Soren was about to breathe a sigh of relief, a voice startled him from behind. "What do you have there?" It was Dr. Ileana Lewis, standing right behind him with a flare gun in her hand. Soren nearly jumped out of his skin. He hadn't heard her approach, and now here she was, arriving just in time. Without wasting a second, Dr. Lewis fired the flare gun into the sky. The loud bang and the bright flash startled the wolf, causing her to retreat into the woods. Soren couldn't help but feel relieved, though a part of him admired the wolf's earlier actions. Dr. Lewis didn't waste time. She quickly assessed the baby, her hands moving with the practiced ease of a professional. "He's a healthy boy, all things considered," she said, marveling at how the child had survived such an ordeal. A bit shaken, but no injuries. Soren was amazed at how calm and composed she was in the situation. He climbed into the passenger seat of her car, holding the baby close as Ileana drove them back to town. He was too relieved to mention that she had chosen her car instead of her motorcycle for once. In the days that followed, Soren found himself seeing Dr. Lewis far more frequently than he ever expected. The baby boy had captured their hearts, and Soren, who had always been a solitary figure on his farm, couldn't bear the thought of the child being placed in foster care. He offered to adopt the boy, a decision that surprised even him. To his delight, Dr. Lewis continued to take an interest in both him and the baby. Over the next few months, the two grew closer, drawn together by their shared care for the little boy. What had started as a medical emergency had blossomed into something neither of them had expected. By the time autumn rolled around, it was decided Dr. Lewis would no longer go by her maiden name. She was now Dr. Ileana Lewis, soon to be Eliana Baker, and they were a family. One day, the three of them, Soren, Ileana, and their adopted son, enjoyed a picnic in the shade of a forest between two alfalfa fields, which were now tall and thriving once again. The little boy, now starting to stand on his own, pointed excitedly toward the distance. "Dog," he exclaimed in his toddler voice. Eliana laughed and looked at Soren, who was smiling quietly. "Is that a dog?" she asked, raising an eyebrow playfully. Soren shrugged. "I could have sworn it was a wolf."